My name is Danielle Caldwell. The text message came on a Thursday morning while I was hunched over my laptop, reworking a client proposal for the third time that week. Don't forget the reunion Sunday. Everyone's coming. Aunt Patricia has been asking about you. I read it twice. Then I turned my phone face down on the desk and stared at the ceiling the way you do when you're calculating something that has nothing to do with numbers. I was measuring emotional cost. Running the math on whether I had enough of myself left to spend on a weekend that historically sent me home feeling hollowed out. My mom always made these messages sound simple. Don't forget. As if the Caldwell family reunion was just a casual backyard barbecue, burgers and potato salad and cousins catching up on ordinary things. As if I could walk into my grandmother's house in Savannah, Georgia without being sized up, compared, and quietly found to be coming up short. I hadn't been home in almost 11 months. The last visit had ended the way most of them did. Me smiling through questions I didn't have clean answers to, nodding through comparisons I hadn't invited, and driving back to Atlanta at night carrying that particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with the body. The kind that parks itself in your chest and stays. I knew I should say no. I typed yes anyway. There's something about family that makes you keep returning even when the returning costs you. Maybe it's your mother's cooking. Maybe it's the sound of your grandmother's laugh from across the yard. Maybe it's that stubborn, irrational hope that this time will be different, that this time they'll look at you and actually see what you see in yourself. I closed my laptop, made a cup of coffee I barely touched, and spent the rest of that Thursday trying not to overthink Sunday. I left Atlanta before 6 in the morning to get ahead of the weekend traffic on I-16. The drive to Savannah always felt like traveling backward in time. The city gradually thinned out, the skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror, the highway widening into long flat stretches of Georgia farmland, pine trees lining the road like a corridor leading somewhere older and slower. The air coming through my cracked window smelled like red clay and morning fog, and something I didn't have a name for that was simply home. I had made this drive more times than I could count. As a little girl wedged in the back seat between my older brother Marcus and our overnight bags, fighting over the AUX cord. As a college student at Georgia State coming back for holidays with a head full of plans and a heart full of certainty that I was going to do something significant with my life. As a woman in my late 20s, newly committed to building my own consulting practice, convinced I was maybe 6 months away from the breakthrough that would make everything make sense. Now I drove alone, 33 years old. 6 years into building something I couldn't always explain to people who needed success to look a particular way before they believed in it. I had stopped at a bakery in Midtown before I left, picked up a layered red velvet cake that I knew my younger cousins would demolish within 20 minutes of arrival. I had a good bottle of wine for my mom and a card for my grandmother. I had dressed carefully, not overdressed, not underdressed. And somewhere on the stretch of highway past Macon, I had begun, without quite meaning to, rehearsing answers to the questions I knew were coming. How's business, Danielle? Are you seeing anyone? When are you moving back to Savannah? So what exactly is it that you do again? That last one always landed like a small paper cut. Not deep enough to bleed, but sharp enough to feel. Business growth consulting. Digital strategy. Brand positioning for small and mid-sized companies. The words were accurate. To my family, they translated more or less to, she sits at home on her laptop doing something we can't quite picture. I turned up the music and watched the mile markers pass. By the time the Savannah skyline appeared in the distance and the road narrowed into the familiar neighborhoods of my childhood, something settled over me that surprised me. Not dread, something closer to resolve. I was going. I would be present, warm, and patient. I would eat my grandmother's cooking. I would hug my aunts. I would answer the questions without flinching. I would drive home to Atlanta with my dignity intact. I just didn't know yet how much that plan was about to get tested. My grandmother's house was already buzzing when I pulled up. Cars lined the street in both directions. Music drifted from the backyard. Some old Motown record my grandfather used to play on Sunday mornings. The smell of slow-cooked ribs reached me before I had even cut the engine. I sat in the car for exactly 30 seconds. "You're fine. You're here. Just be here." Then I grabbed the cake, found my composure, and walked through the front gate. The next hour was the good part. The part that always made me forget, temporarily, why these gatherings were complicated. My grandmother held my face in both hands and told me I was too skinny. My Aunt Patricia immediately announced she was fixing me a plate before I'd even set my bag down. My little cousins, the teenagers, pulled me aside to show me something ridiculous on TikTok. My mom squeezed my hand when she saw me and didn't let go for a long moment. This was my family. And in the best moments, they were everything. I set the red velvet cake on the table inside and stood back to watch the backyard come alive. Lawn chairs and folding tables arranged across the grass. The men gathered near my uncle's grill with cold drinks and strong opinions about football. The older women on the porch trading stories and dispensing wisdom freely to anyone within earshot. Kids running between legs, shrieking, deliriously happy in the way that only children at family gatherings can be. My cousin Deshawn found me by the drink cooler and grinned. "You actually made it," he said. "I always make it eventually," I said. "You brought that cake. That either buys you goodwill for the whole day or starts a war over who gets the last slice." I laughed. A real one. And for a while, a good, real, solid while, it felt genuinely wonderful to be there. They started the way they always did. Gently, almost affectionately, the way a door swings open before anyone decides whether what's behind it is welcome. My Aunt Patricia led things off. "You hear about your cousin Jerome? Just closed on a house in Charlotte. 4 bedrooms, before 32. She said it the way people announce shared victories, chest lifted, eyes bright. "That boy worked hard. Very proud of him." I said that was wonderful. Because it was. Then someone brought up my younger sister Tanya, who was being promoted at her firm in D.C. The room lit up for that one, and I felt both things at the same time, the way I always did. Genuine pride in my sister, and the familiar undertow of being the implicit contrast in the room. "And what about you, Danielle?" My Aunt Renee turned to me with the particular smile of someone asking a question they already think they know the answer to. "How's your work going?" "Really well," I said. "The online stuff?" "Consulting. Yes. She nodded slowly. "You're still doing that?" "Still doing that," I confirmed, keeping my voice level. Marcus arrived late. I heard him before I saw him. His voice, that specific register of easy authority he had perfected somewhere in his mid-30s. Marcus Caldwell was 41 years old. He ran a commercial real estate firm in Atlanta that had, by most visible measures, done extremely well. He drove the kind of car that made people look twice in parking lots. He moved through a room with the confidence of someone who had never once seriously doubted his own competence. He was also my brother. And there was a version of our history, the early version, the childhood version, where he had been the person I looked up to most in the world. I wasn't sure exactly when the distance between us had calcified into something harder. Somewhere between his first big deal and my first difficult year of freelancing, he had shifted from believer to skeptic. And the skepticism had hardened over time into something I didn't have a kind name for. He hugged me when he saw me. "Warm enough. Danielle. Glad you came." "Glad to be here," I said. My grandmother had pulled out the long dining table and extended it with the card tables that lived in her basement, covered with the good tablecloths she kept in a plastic bin between occasions. By the time dinner was ready, there were close to 20 of us finding seats. The choreography of a large family navigating who sits where, the children eventually settling at their own separate corner, someone making 3 trips to the kitchen before everyone had what they needed. The food was extraordinary. It always was. My grandmother's macaroni and cheese, the baked kind, with a golden crust on top that she alone had ever successfully reproduced, was on the table. Ribs from the grill, charred and perfect. Collard greens that had been simmering since early morning. Cornbread in a cast-iron skillet. Sweet potato pie cooling on the windowsill. I ate and I listened and I participated in small, careful doses. Conversation moved the way it does at these gatherings, on multiple tracks at once, everyone talking across and around each other, stories overlapping, someone's punchline landing on top of someone else's serious point. I was managing it. I was genuinely managing it, and I thought with about 40 minutes left in the meal that maybe I was going to get through this day intact after all. Then someone near the far end of the table, I never quite caught who started it, called down to my end and asked what I'd been up to lately. What was new with me? Marcus got there first. He laughed before he even spoke. Honestly, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with the comfort of a man who has never once been made to feel small at his own family's table. Danielle's kind of just dead weight right now. Still trying to figure things out at 33. The table went quiet. The immediate circle of us went quiet in the specific way that means everyone heard, and no one quite knows what to do with what they've just heard. I felt the words arrive. I had developed, through sheer necessity, a skin thick enough to take most of what came at family gatherings and drive home more or less whole. But this was Marcus. At a table full of people who would carry this moment home with them like a souvenir. In the house where we had both grown up. With my mother sitting 4 chairs away. Dead weight. Then came the sounds. The small, uncomfortable chuckles. The nervous half-laughs from people who didn't know what else to do, who weren't going to defend me but weren't comfortable with silence either. The slight shift in body language as people decided this wasn't their moment to enter. My mother looked down at her plate. Nobody said a word on my behalf. In that silence, something happened inside me. I have tried since then to describe it accurately, and the closest I can get is this. It was like a room I hadn't known I was locked inside suddenly showed me its door. I saw it clearly, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that my family had already decided who I was. Not recently. Not at this table. A long time ago. And everything I had been doing in the years since, carefully framing my work in approachable language, softening my answers, trying to make my life legible on their terms, none of it had moved anything. The verdict had been reached without my testimony, and no amount of explaining was going to reopen the case. They had decided. And realizing that, truly feeling the full weight of it settle into my chest and then, strangely, begin to lift, was the most clarifying thing I had ever experienced. I didn't make a speech. I want to be honest about that, because I had spent years imagining what I might say in a moment like this one. The precise, devastating response. The speech that left the room rethinking everything. The words that would make Marcus understand, in real time, exactly what he had just done. I said none of it. I set my napkin on the table. Stood up slowly, with the deliberate quiet of someone who has made a decision and finds no particular need to announce it. I picked up my bag from the back of my chair. I walked over to the side counter, where the red velvet cake I had driven 4 hours round trip to bring was sitting, slightly overlooked, beside the extra dinner rolls. I looked at it for a moment. Then I walked to the front door. Danielle. My mother's voice, soft and complicated, came from behind me. I stopped. Turned around. She was looking at me the way she sometimes did, with an expression that held both love and helplessness in equal measure, the face of a mother who could not always protect her children from each other. I'll call you when I get home, Mom, I said quietly. I walked out. No one followed me. I got to my car. I sat for a moment in the dark of the driveway, the sounds of the reunion still audible, music, voices, laughter, filtering through the walls and windows of the house I had grown up in. I started the engine, backed out into the street, and I drove the 4 hours back to Atlanta alone, in the dark, on a Sunday night, with Savannah disappearing in my mirrors. I didn't cry. I was too busy thinking. I got back to my apartment in Atlanta a little after midnight. I dropped my bag at the door, got a glass of water from the kitchen, sat down at my desk without turning on the TV, without opening my phone, without filling the silence with anything at all. I just sat with it. And I thought, not emotionally or not only emotionally, but clearly and honestly, about the last 6 years. The real version. Not the version my family had assembled from fragments and assumptions, but the actual record of what I had done and who I had become doing it. I thought about the clients I had helped. The small business owner in Decatur who had been about to close her boutique when I came in and rebuilt her entire digital presence from scratch. She was still open, still growing, still sending me handwritten thank you notes at Christmas. The restaurant group in Buckhead that had hired me to help them figure out why their newest location wasn't performing, and whose quarterly revenue I had helped improve by restructuring how they thought about their customer acquisition. The nonprofit in East Atlanta that needed someone to translate their mission into a brand identity that could actually fundraise. None of this had been visible at a dinner table in Savannah. But it was real. It was documented and measurable and real. And I was not dead weight. The problem was not that my success didn't exist. The problem was that I had been spending my energy trying to make it visible to people who had already looked away. I opened my laptop. I worked until 3 in the morning. When I finally stopped, it wasn't because I was tired. It was because I had a plan, and I needed rest so I could execute it. The next several months were the quietest and most focused of my professional life. I stopped performing visibility and started building substance. I audited everything. My client roster, my pricing, my service offerings, my proposals, the language I used to describe what I did. Almost all of it needed work. Not because the work itself was weak, but because I had been presenting it from a position of someone seeking approval rather than someone offering genuine value. I raised my rates. This sounds simple. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done professionally, because somewhere in 6 years of grinding and doubting and absorbing my family's skepticism, I had internalized the idea that I should be grateful for whatever came my way. That charging what my work was actually worth was somehow presumptuous, as if I hadn't yet earned the right to decide my own value. The reunion made to focus more and broke that open. I raised my rates and I held them. I stopped apologizing for the number. I stopped adding qualifications or offering to discuss flexibility before anyone had even pushed back. I sent the proposal, stated the fee, and waited. And something interesting happened. The clients who were right for what I actually offered didn't flinch. I refined my specific expertise, digital growth strategy and brand positioning for small businesses looking to scale. I built a proper case study portfolio. I sought out a mentor. A woman named Carolyn Webb who had built a consulting practice in Houston from nothing and grown it into a firm with 7-figure annual revenue. She did not coddle me. She told me, in our second conversation, that the biggest thing holding me back was that I was still trying to be understood by people who hadn't hired me to explain myself. That landed hard. And true. I worked in near total silence. No announcements. No updates for the people back home. No posts designed to signal progress before the progress was real. Just the work. Just forward. The breakthrough came from a direction I hadn't anticipated. A founder I had done a small project with 2 years earlier, a woman named Tasha running an e-commerce wellness brand out of Nashville, called me out of nowhere. Her business had grown significantly since we'd last worked together. She needed real, sustained strategic help. And she had, unprompted, told 2 of her founder friends about me. I took the meeting. I took the contract. And I went to work. Within 3 months, her online revenue had grown by over 80%. It was not a miracle. It was the result of repositioning her brand identity, restructuring her content strategy, and fixing a customer acquisition funnel that was leaking in 3 specific places that I identified in the first week. The work was methodical and unglamorous and completely effective. But what that engagement gave me, beyond the results, beyond the referrals it generated, beyond the case study, was something I hadn't realized I needed as badly as I did. Tasha called me the week after we wrapped and said, simply and completely, "You changed what this company is going to be." Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon several weeks later, I opened an email that I read 3 complete times before it fully registered. A mid-sized investment firm based in New York was launching a new division focused on emerging markets and needed a consultant to lead the strategic framework for their small business development initiative. Specifically, how the division would identify, evaluate, and support businesses in underserved communities across the Southeast. They had been referred to me through a chain of connections I hadn't even been tracking. They had reviewed my work. They wanted a meeting. The contract value, if awarded, was $450,000. I sat with that number for a very long time. I thought about the drive home from Savannah. I thought about sitting at my desk at midnight with a glass of water, deciding. I thought about every uncomfortable conversation I'd had about my rates, every morning I'd gotten up and worked in silence with no external validation, every time I had chosen to keep going when the easier thing would have been to find a real job and let everyone exhale. I also heard Marcus's voice. Dead weight. I clicked to schedule the meeting. It went extremely well. I got the contract. I want to be specific about this part, because it tends to get glossed over in stories like mine. I delivered. Not adequately. Not satisfactorily. I delivered at a level that surprised people who thought they understood what they were getting when they hired a solo consultant from Atlanta. The engagement ran for 6 months. I built a strategic framework for the division that was grounded in real data, field research, community interviews, analysis of existing small business support ecosystems in Birmingham, Memphis, Charlotte, and Atlanta. I identified the gaps in how existing programs were failing the businesses they claimed to serve. I built a tiered evaluation model that the division could actually use, not just present in a PowerPoint deck and shelf. At the final presentation in New York, the managing director said that what I had delivered had shifted how the entire division was thinking about its mandate. That was a good moment. The better moment came later, alone in my apartment, when I allowed myself to feel what I had actually done. Not the money, though the money was real and it changed things in ways both practical and psychological. But the proof. The kind of proof that lives in documents and contracts and the professional record, that I was exactly who I had always known myself to be. My name started moving in circles I hadn't entered. Not loudly. Not with any single moment of public recognition. It moved the way things move in professional networks, introduction to introduction, recommendation to recommendation. The quiet current of people who have worked with someone excellent and cannot help mentioning it when someone needs that same thing. Inquiries began arriving that I hadn't generated. A speaking invitation from a small business conference in Atlanta. A request to write a piece for an industry publication. A partnership conversation with a firm in Dallas. I built a small team. A junior strategist first, a recent graduate from Spelman who was sharper than I had been at her age and who pushed back on my thinking in ways that made it better. Then an operations manager who was better at systems and workflows than I was and who immediately brought an order to the business that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. My practice was no longer just me. It had structure. It had capacity that extended beyond the hours I could personally work. It had, for the first time, the shape of something built to last. I did not call home to announce any of this. I wasn't ready for my success to become a performance. That wasn't what it was for. I heard about Marcus through my mother first, and then through Deshawn, who had fewer filters. Marcus's commercial real estate firm had run into serious trouble. He'd made an aggressive expansion play in the Phoenix market at the wrong moment, right before a correction that tightened everything. Some major contracts had dissolved. A partnership had gone sideways. He had let staff go. The firm that had been his identity for a decade was fighting to stay relevant. I heard this in pieces, over several phone calls, during the second year after the Savannah reunion. I thought about him more than I expected to. Not with satisfaction. That isn't quite honest, because some part of me felt the justice of it, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the dominant feeling was something closer to recognition. I knew what it felt like to have the thing you built start coming apart. I knew the specific, private shame of it. I knew it had nothing to do with intelligence or worth, and everything to do with timing and decisions, and the unmerciful pressure of markets that don't care about your confidence or your track record. I hoped he had good people around him. I kept my distance, because he hadn't called. And until he did, I wouldn't presume anything. It came on a Wednesday evening in October. I was at my desk going through proposals, a mug of tea cooling at my elbow, when my phone lit up on the desk beside my laptop. Marcus. I looked at his name. Let it ring once. Twice. On the third ring, I picked up. Danielle. His voice was different. The same voice, same deep register, same Georgia vowels underneath the professional polish. But the texture had changed completely. The ease was gone. The certainty. What was left was something I had genuinely never heard from my brother in my entire life. He needed help. He was calling me because he needed help. Marcus, I said, I need your help. 4 words. I sat with them for a moment before I said anything. He told me about the firm. Not all of it. He was still Marcus, and some things don't dissolve overnight, but enough. Enough for me to understand the shape of the problem and the severity of it, and the fact that he had been carrying it longer than he had admitted to anyone. He was not calling casually. He was calling because his options had narrowed and his pride had reached its limit, and I was, as it turned out, the most qualified person he knew for what he needed. He was calling me. I could have said no. I want to be honest about that. The choice I made only meant something because the other choice was real. I could have said no, politely and professionally, and no one on earth could have blamed me. I'm at capacity right now. I can send you some referrals. Clean, airtight, completely defensible. I could have said less polite things. I could have found a way to slide Savannah back into the conversation, let him hear his own words from my side of the phone, and watched what that did to the silence on the line. I didn't want either of those things. Not because I was above it. Not because the memory of that dinner table had faded. It hadn't, and I'm not going to pretend it had. But I had built something in the years since I walked out of my grandmother's house, and what I had built was not only a business. It was a way of existing in the world. A self-definition that no longer required Marcus's validation, which meant, by the same logic, that it no longer required his punishment either. I also thought about the people who worked for him, the agents and coordinators and support staff who had built their livelihoods around a firm that was struggling. They had nothing to do with a dinner table in Savannah. They had mortgages and kids in school and plans for next year. If my expertise could make a difference, then withholding it was not strength. It was pride wearing a coat it didn't own. I'll help you, I said. I heard him exhale. The specific exhale of someone who has been holding their breath longer than they realized. Thank you, Danielle. Really, Marcus. I said his name calmly. Not hard, but clear in a way that made him stop. I need you to understand something before we start. Okay, he said. I'm not doing this to prove anything to you. Not anymore. A pause. The kind that means someone is actually listening. What happened at Grandma's house? You calling me dead weight? I'm not carrying that into this. Not as leverage. Not as a wound I need you to acknowledge before I agree to help. I've moved past needing that from you. I let that settle for a moment. But I need you to be clear about who you're calling. I am, he said. Not the version of me you described at that table. Not the unfinished version you'd already decided on. The actual person. The person who has spent 6 years building exactly what she said she was building. The person who has delivered results that are documented and verified and referenced in boardrooms in New York. I know, he said. Quietly. Good. Then here's how this works. We do this like professionals. You give me everything. The numbers, the contracts, the decisions that got you here. No ego, no filtering. I'll tell you what I see and what I think can be done. And we go from there. That's fair, he said. That's more than fair. One more thing. He waited. I already know my worth, Marcus. That's why I can help you without needing this to be an apology. But don't mistake my willingness to help you for forgetting. I remember that night clearly. I've just decided it doesn't have to be the first thing between us anymore. There was a long silence, and then I heard something in his voice, something underneath the stress and the humility of the ask that I recognized from a long time ago. From childhood. From before any of this. Just my brother. I hear you, he said. Good. Send me your financials and your current contract pipeline. We'll get on a call Thursday and go through everything properly. I put the phone down. Then I opened my laptop and went back to work. I didn't win by proving Marcus wrong. I won by stopping needing to. I know how small that distinction sounds. I know that when you are sitting at a dinner table being called dead weight by your own brother, the idea that the goal is to stop needing his validation feels like advice offered by someone who has never been in that room. I understand that. I was in that room. But I am telling you what happened on the other side of walking out that door. Freedom arrived not when he saw what I had built, but when his seeing it stopped being the point. The need to prove yourself to people who doubted you is a form of captivity. It ties your sense of arrival to their moment of recognition, which means they still hold something over you even after you've left. The day you stop needing the proof to be for them is the day you are genuinely, completely free to build for yourself. What I built was real. A practice with a name, a team, a client roster, and a future I looked forward to. It was built out of 6 years of invisible work that was never actually invisible to me. I saw every hour of it, every failure and revision and morning I got up and kept going. Marcus's firm, with my help, and with his willingness to actually listen, stabilized over the following year. It was hard, deliberate, unglamorous work. But it survived. And through it we arrived somewhere neither of us had predicted, a professional relationship built on genuine respect. The kind that comes not from shared history, but from demonstrated reality. He never formally apologized for Savannah. I never formally asked him to. Some things live between people as understanding rather than words. That was enough. What mattered, what will always matter, was what I did with the night I walked out that door. I chose myself, completely and without apology, and built from there. That was always going to be enough.